Today I'm not only going to show you how I built the 180-gallon aquarium sump filter that now supports 3,715 gallons of aquariums, but I'm also going to show you how it works, ending with the most important part being why it works. First and foremost, the very basics so I don't lose you on this. Water is pumped up to the main aquarium from the aquarium sump. A sump is just a volume of water typically located below the aquarium. From there, as it's distributed throughout your main display, it will overflow through some plumbing that you would have behind something called a weir. Now, I've shown you how to build all this before, and we're not going to dive into plumbing today. That water is then drained all the way back down to the sump, where it goes through the cycle once again. Now, in this case, above we have a 375-gallon aquarium that also has another 180-gallon aquarium plumbed into it, a 700 and a 2000, not to mention the volume of the water in the 180. I started off with a bare 180-gallon tank and siliconed in some 6mm or 1/4-inch acrylic panels that measured 23 inches wide, 18 inches tall. The sump itself is 7 feet long, 2 feet wide, 2 feet tall, using 1/2-inch glass. So that 23 inches wide on the inside now makes sense. These serve as the baffles and or compartment separators, which also serve to decide the flow and direction of the water. Now, we originally started out with 3 baffles on either side, but I decided I would lower that to only 5 to increase the fluidized area. The first area would be where I would mechanically filter the water, meaning that we're going to try to remove the particulates from this area. However, in there right now is just some sponge and also some sponge filters, extra biological media. I want these cycled at all times to use on other aquariums that I'm initially setting up and or for quarantine, because I don't technically run quarantine all the time. For the gallery, I set them up as I need them. Now, that chamber is technically incomplete, because I probably will end up building something for filter socks or make maintenance a little bit easier, but given the sheer volume of water that we're pushing through this, which at this point is only around 7,000 gallons per hour, I don't want to continuously have mechanical filters like filter socks constantly clogging up and needing changes every 2 or 3 days. Sponge lasts a heck of a lot longer, especially if you're going with 30 PPI that I'm using here. PPI when it comes to sponge is how many pores per inch. The higher the number, the finer the sponge. This compartment alone is 19 inches tall, even though the whole tank is 24, by 10 inches wide, by 23 inches long, or 24 inches long, making it around 20 gallons in size, which seems like a lot, but it's a big filter, and I want to accommodate a tremendous amount of mechanical filtration. That chamber is lifted up by 1 inch, meaning that when water comes in that first chamber, it has to flow under that acrylic panel in order to get to the next chamber and continue to flow. Water's always going to flow in the path of least resistance. But because I've lifted it up by 1 inch, that means I have 1 inch above the water surface, meaning water can't pass over it, it's got to go under. But that 1 inch by approximately 23 inches wide also accounts for allowing me to get a flow rate of approximately 13,000 gallons per hour if I wanted to run it at that, which is double what I actually do. And the benefit of that is I'm not having a tremendous amount of gushing water, so I only need to raise the panels by approximately 1 inch. We then enter another form of mechanical as well as biological filtration chamber. This chamber is much smaller though, it's only 5 inches wide and holds about 10 gallons of media. You're probably wondering what's in there though. They're called filter brushes and they're from the pond hobby. In this video you'll discover that I not only use aquarium methods within my hobby, but pond methods as well as aquaculture methods for building filtrations and so forth. These are approximately 5.5 inches wide by 24 inches tall. Now in the pond hobby, they're typically put on a long pole and we'd have a bunch of them on there. Put it in the flow of the water and it serves to mechanically filter out all the particulates. But if you put a bunch side by side, you can no longer kind of see through it. However, this also serves as a great home for beneficial bacteria. So by the time it gets to the third chamber, we've mechanically filtered the water twice, plus began the biological process. Now, once the water passes through the mechanical chamber, up through the first biological and further mechanical, water has to flow over into the third chamber, which serves exclusively as biological filtration. This chamber is about 8 inches wide, same dimensions on everything else, and holds 16 gallons of biological media. This is where most of the nitrogen cycle is going to take place. Water has to flow up through 16 gallons of biological media and into the fourth chamber, which is a little more than 60 gallons in size. In here, we have something called K3 fluidized media. You guys remember back probably 15 years ago, I started showing you, maybe 16 years ago, I started showing you fluidized methods of filtration, from using water bottles to big 55-gallon barrels, aquarium sumps. I showed you how to build them in all different various methods and ways. But in this example, being 60 gallons, I should technically have 40 gallons of biological media, but I only have around 25. I didn't buy enough. I did before I removed that final chamber, but removing it, I need to get another 15 gallons. And this area serves as biological filtration as well. Now, the way that stuff works is, as this is all fluidizing around and kind of jumbling and hitting each other, it's knocking off all the bacteria on the outside. That is basically bacteria that's lived out its life and or not as strong as the new up-and-coming vibrant stuff, allowing for, on the outside of the fluidized media, to only house the strongest and most powerful bacteria. However, the inside of these spheres are protected. Nothing's hitting them. So all the microorganisms and bacteria can live out their life on the inside. We will get, of course, full fluidization once this becomes saturated in bacteria. The problem is that this stuff is neutrally buoyant. It doesn't really float that well, and if you just kind of touch it, it sinks and then maybe comes up a little bit, but once we saturate it in bacteria, it will become suspended in the aquarium itself. Fluidized filters are fantastic because they're incredibly powerful and hands-off. You don't have to maintain them at all. With that said, the number one complaint is their sound. They're really loud, and that's because most times we use air bubbles to create that fluidization. However, I'm using a water pump in there. It only produces about 600 gallons per hour, but that gives it a turnover rate of that entire area of 10 times an hour, and I'm only using 10 watts to run it. Once I add in the additional media, give it more time to saturate, this will tumble a little bit differently and look far more full. Right now, like I said, there's just not enough in it, but give it more time. The next chamber is the water, and then also once again has to flow under the next baffle, which is raised 1 inch, and up through another dozen of these. Or, in translation, another 10 gallons of biological as well as mechanical filtration, giving that water one final polish before it overflows into the final chamber where the pumps reside. We can also put our heaters in there and any other equipment that we might want that we don't want in the main aquarium, like UV sterilizers, for example. The water then returns to the main aquarium, and the cycle continues. Now, the electric eel aquarium has an overflow built into it that runs into the sump. I have a small pump that returns water up to it. The 700 gallon has an overflow that overflows into the 2000. The 2000 has a small pump returning water to the 700. The 2000 also has drain pipes that come all the way over here and a pump that returns all the way to the 2000. However, each aquarium also has its own standalone filtration rated enough for that aquarium size. Now, why does this work now that we know how I built it and how it kind of functions? The why is the most important. And luckily, many of you guys know, thousands in fact, because I wrote all about this, everything I'm about to tell you was in this book that I wrote in 2013. In the chapter of filtration, where it's not about just how to build aquariums, this was my opportunity to deep dive, where I give you a basic overview that lasts 3 pages just talking about filtration in general and what it truly means to your aquarium, knowing your bacteria, the types of filtration and media that we typically use, and how much biological media do you actually need for the fish that you're actually keeping. That's not something that's talked about a lot, and we're going to talk about it for the first time today. Then, of course, we get into flow rates and sizing, and then if you want to know how to build the filters, I for the next well over 100 pages is building the filters. Chapter on filtration is by far my favorite chapter, and it's about 220 pages long. The book is 552 pages long, like a description. First and foremost, there's typically 3 different methods of filtration. Whether it's submerged, which would be like canister filters, hang on the back filters, or any type of media that is in a constant underwater state and not moving. Then we get to fluidized, which is, you can clearly see what fluidized filtration is, and then we have emerged filtration, where the filter media is typically above the water surface and water is rain down or trickle down. We'll see these in wet-dry filters in the aquarium hobby or in backy showers in the pond hobby, for example. Now, all the numbers that I'm about to disclose to you come from aquaculture sources, biologists, and personal testing before I put this in the book. Well, once you decide on what type of filtration you're going with, we then need to decide how much biological media we're actually going to require for the fish that we're actually keeping. You might often see aquarium filters that you purchase rated for a certain tank size, and that depends on flow rates and what you're looking for, but how much biological it actually holds will truly depict how many fish it can support, let alone tank size. So when it comes to fluidized filtration, it's widely accepted that it can support approximately 3 grams of a waste per 24 hours, meaning that it could start off with certain ammonia levels and within 24 hours, it's completely gone. Submerged media is substantially more. This is due to the fact that it has a massive amount of surface area, but there are pros and cons to each method of filtration, and perhaps we should do another filtration video like this in the future. If you want me to do that, give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comment section below. Unless you're watching this premiere and I'm sitting there right with you, W's in the chat.
I love premiering my videos because I get to watch them at the same time as you.
Submerged media, however, can handle approximately 9 grams of waste. And when I talk about waste, it doesn't mean that it's 9 grams of liquid ammonia. It means that we're typically adding in 9 grams of food, which fish then break down into ammonia and create urea as well. And then emerged. Typically we're looking at plastic bio balls, we're looking at pot scrubbies, and or something like this. Now, although these are in a submerged state, I'm going to use them as an example for emerged media just so you know the numbers. That can handle approximately 4 grams of waste per 24 hours, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's per liter of media. So in total, and if you paid attention to the size of each compartment and how much biological media we actually have in here versus the types that are in here, this aquarium sump at the very least can support 1,440 grams of waste produced every single day. But honestly, who cares? How do you convert that into knowing how many fish it could handle? Like what? Few Oscar fish, Asian arowana. What are we talking here, Joey? The simple fact is this. It's widely accepted for calculating these things based off of a rule of thumb. A cubic inch of fish, and this sounds totally morbid, weighs approximately 10 grams. To put that into perspective, an Oscar fish that, let's say, is 12 inches long, and we're talking adult, at least 2 inches thick, 4 inches tall, would weigh around 960 grams. Sorry, I do go back and read these numbers. This exact example's in here, which is a little bit more than 2 pounds. And I think that you guys would agree that a full-grown Oscar weighs a little bit more than 2 pounds. Maybe somewhere upwards of 5 pounds, etc. Depending on the size of your fish, we could figure it out. It's also recommended to feed approximately 3% of your fish's body weight per 24 hours, which means that based off that Oscar fish that weighs 960 grams, we would be feeding around 29 grams of food a day. Knowing all this, it would need 10 liters of fluidized media, or 6 liters of emerged media, or 3 liters of submerged media. 3 liters is less than a gallon. Now, would you put a FX5 or FX6 on a tank housing 4 to 6 Oscars? That would handle it. It holds around 6 liters of media. Technically, yeah, that would kind of be enough. You might run into ammonia bumps and whatnot, but we're also not calculating the substrate in the aquarium and or other surfaces in the aquarium, because bacteria doesn't care what it grows on, it just needs the right conditions, which we also covered in this book, including what the temperature should be, the pH preference, whether they like the light or the dark, etc., etc., etc. However, because of that, I like to add in an additional 20% of media just for those ammonia spikes or not, because you'll also see oftentimes people were like, oh, I woke up, my fish died and I don't know what happened, water parameters are fine, an ammonia spike can happen. and be taken care of before you even know it, but that ammonia spike might be so high that outs your fish. Or these ammonia spikes are happening so often you're not catching them in time, and it's causing micro stresses in the fish that build up over time, and eventually it just succumbs to it. A lot of micro stresses a lot of people don't account for. However, with proper filtration, we also know that a gallon of water can support roughly 10 grams of fish. Maybe it's not ideal and they might want a little bit more room, but like I said, the water can support them before it becomes deadly, so long as we have ample filtration methods within it. And back to that example of the Oscar, if he weighs 960 grams, and that's like kind of a small Oscar, but isn't that 96 or 100 gallons? Would you put an Oscar in a 100-gallon aquarium? These calculations work, ladies and gentlemen. So now you not only know about what size of aquarium your fish would actually need based off of what's going to be healthy for it, and how to size the filtration based on how much biological media it's going to be required to support that life. But then we can start getting into dimensions of the tank, flow rates, plumbing, and that sort of thing. But not in today's video. The focus here was just on the aquarium sump, how we built it, how it works, and of course, why it works. With that said, this looks like an incredibly expensive setup. The aquarium itself is 4 or 5 years old. The pumps I've had for about 8 years. The lids that I'm keeping evaporation down with are simply double wall polycarbonate panels. I've shown you how to make lids out of them many times in the past. And then all of the media, including these filter brushes, the submerged media, and that fluidized K3 media, you guessed it, I got it all on Temu. Why? Because I preferred to pay like $1 or $2 for this as opposed to buying it online for $25. The fluidized media in the amount that I have, I preferred to pay around $3 per gallon instead of $12 per liter. And then of course all the submerged media also came from Temu over time, but we've just been kind of building it up. I paid next to nothing for this, and you can too. My code and link is in the description to jump on Temu and grab your biological media. I know so many people that go on there just for their media. But make sure you use my code so you can get 30% off in like a $100 coupon bundle. That's what I do. It's great for, it's only good for new users and reinstalled users. So if you already have the app, go ahead and delete it, or use your wife's phone or husband or whatever you got on the go. I use Tamara's every once in a while so that I can get and use my own codes. On the note of this aquarium though, I did have a bit of an algae breakout in the 375-gallon aquarium, and I knew that I'm going to have to dose this with CO2 to really get this going, because we're less than 2 weeks away from going to get the discus. And I figured with 2 weeks of really giving this tank a good shot of CO2 for those 2 weeks would really turn this aquarium around. With that said though, it's connected to so many other aquariums that I'd only want to dose 375 gallons. I don't want to dose 3,700 gallons. So during the day, I shut the return pump off. The aquarium then filter's already cycled because it's running everything else. And the CO2 only runs when the lights are on. When the lights go off, the pump comes on a few hours later after the CO2 is completely dissolved out of the tank and starts running through the entire system again. If I ever need to cut off the Electric Eel's aquarium, I just shut his pump off and his filter will run that tank. And same thing goes for everything. One of the things I really want to get to do though is run my piranha aquarium into this tank, because if you didn't know or do the math, I mentioned that this tank will support 1,440 grams of waste every 24 hours. And at 3% conversion rate, that means we can have over 100 pounds of fish in the aquariums supported by that tank alone. And I would say I probably only have maybe 60 to 80 pounds of fish out here. I know how morbid that sounds. So this filter is going to be big enough to support everything on its own, but they also have their individual filters. However, I made it bigger because we still need to add a lot of fish to the 2,000, the 16-foot piranha aquarium, as well as the 700-gallon planted angelfish tank. And if you want to see any of that, or if you enjoyed these types of videos, make sure you subscribe if you haven't been already. Give this video a thumbs up. Drop a comment in the description if you want more of these types of videos, because I promised for years and years ago that I would start deep diving into stuff, and today was more of a summary, but I certainly wouldn't mind deep diving and sharing how I got to be to the point where I could build whatever I need and have it work flawlessly. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you soon.